Right, good evening everybody. Thank you for coming along to today's planning applications meeting. And can I first of all do a welcome, particularly to the new members. I hope you enjoy your time on the planning applications committee. As I say to everybody every year, particularly new ones on the committee, don't come on the committee if you think there's going to be any political point scoring, because it's not that sort of committee. But please enjoy it. Fairly quiet one today, but with a little bit of training afterwards. Okay, so if we get straight onto the agenda, item number 1 is the evacuation procedure. We've not been notified of any practice drills today, so if the alarms go off, we'll treat it for real, and if we can vacate this room from either side of the chamber, down the stairs and meet over the road by the Yorkshire Bank. Please don't use the lifts, and if you need any help getting out, give us a shout, we'll make sure that's done. It's also a good time to remind people to either turn your phones off or put them onto silent, and just to remind people that this meeting, like most of the meetings in the council, is recorded and put out via the council's website within the next couple of days. Item number 2 is to receive apologies. I've had apologies from councillors Beaumont and Smith, and I think that's it. Item 3 is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of May. You happy that I sign those as correct? Thank you. Thanks, Wendy and Wendy. Item number 4 is to receive any declarations of disclosable pecuniary and other interests. No? Okay. Item 5 is any declarations of contact. Thank you. Item number 6 takes us on to the applications, well, application in this case, which is land and garages rear of 2 to 12 Schofield Road. Claire? Oh, Jackie, sorry.
This is a full planning application for the erection of 2 pairs of semi-detached houses and 1 flat over garages to the rear of 2 to 12 Schofield Road. The site is a redundant garage court surrounded by residential housing. Schofield Road is to the south of the site, Beaumont Road to the west and Summers Road to the north. The vehicular and pedestrian access to the site is wide enough for a single car access between house numbers 12 and 14 Schofield Road. It's showing there on the plan. And these neighbours have their own access within the site access road. Schofield Road is higher than the site and Summers Road to the north of the site is lower than the site. The boundary around the site is a mixture of treatments including 1.8 metre high fencing, wire fencing and some planting. The existing properties in the area are a mixture of either mansard, gable or hipped roofs with either red brick, render or pebble dashing. The neighbour at number 14 has erected a 2 metre railings along the boundary and access and some 1.8 metre close boarded fencing. The 2 photos in front of you are showing or looking into the access road and out from the access road. The bottom's looking into the access road there and that's looking out of the site. The top elevation is the flat and the bottom elevations of the 4 semi-detached houses. Each proposed 2-bedroom semi-detached houses have 2 allocated parking spaces. Plots 1 and 4, the 2 extremes, have their parking spaces in tandem with the second space for plots 2 and 3 within the garage block and below the proposed flat. Those are the pink ones there are the garage, the car parking spaces. There have been 17 letters from 5 addresses, including 9 anonymous letters. Please refer to pages 15 and 16 of the agenda for the information of these. The key issues to assess in the determination of this application are the principle of residential development, impact on residential amenity, impact on visual amenity, and the impact on highway safety. The principle of residential development, now national guidance, states as long as the merits of the proposed outweigh any possible demonstrable harm, then there should be a presumption in favour of sustainable development, especially where it has not been demonstrated that there is a 5-year housing land supply. Furthermore, the application will bring back into use a brownfield site which is close to a local centre and bus route. Therefore, the principle of residential development is acceptable. In relation to the impact on residential amenity, as the site is surrounded on all sides by residential dwellings, the impact to these existing properties must be considered. It is considered that the first floor side windows of the houses which serve bathrooms, so it's one there and one there, should be conditioned as being obscure glazed. There is a secondary window to these proposed houses serving a kitchen. However, overlooking from these windows will be blocked by a standard 1.8 metre fence because obviously they're at ground level. The ground floor kitchen window of plot 1 is only 11 metres from the gable of the proposed garage and flat. So we're talking about that distance there. The minimum distance required in the Borough's residential design guide is normally 14 metres. However, there would be some views past the garage, and as stated, there is a secondary window to the kitchen area that would allow additional light to this room. In addition, the distance is over public space, and the residential design guide does state that the distance can be reduced in these cases. The proposed detached flat above the garages is approximately a metre from the rear boundary of properties on Somers Road, there, and is relatively tall at 7.3 metres to the ridge and 3.8 metres to the eaves. However, the gardens to the houses in Somers Road are at least 7 metres long, so the impact to the nearest amenity space outside of these houses is considered acceptable, with the residential design guide stating a minimum of 14 metres, so the distance is well met. There are first floor rear facing roof lights proposed to this flat, but these are high level windows at least 1.7 metres to the windowsill, so we'll have no direct views out of these windows. The proposed garage and flat will also line part of the boundary with number 14. This is number 14 here. However, the orientation to this property will mean that it will not create any significant enclosure or loss of light to this property. There is one side first floor window to the flat overlooking 14 Schofield Road, but again this is a high level window with a windowsill height also being 1.7 metres above the finished floor level. There is also a window on the opposite side of the flat in line with plots 1 and 2, just here. However, this is a landing window, so therefore has been conditioned as obscure glazed. The front windows of the flat are over 11 metres from the boundary with number 8 and number 12 Schofield Road. So again, the 7 metre distance stated within the residential design guide is well met. In conclusion, the proposal meets the residential design guide to all of the neighbouring existing and proposed properties in terms of overlooking and separation distances. It could be argued that the vehicular and pedestrian access to the site could be detrimental to the adjacent existing properties of number 12 and number 14. However, as this site was a former garage site that could potentially have been used by up to 13 vehicles, the coming and goings from 5 proposed dwellings is considered acceptable, and the Council's Environmental Health team have not requested an acoustic fence, although they have requested standard contamination conditions due to the former use of the site. In terms of the impact on visual amenity, national guidance states that high-level quality design is expected, and the design and layout of the properties do create a cohesive group. It is considered that materials can be conditioned so that these are assessed by officers at a later date before development commences. The garage court is currently overgrown and run down, and the proposal, if approved, would improve this site. Having said that, the site is not highly visible from any public areas. In terms of the impact on highway safety, Highways consider that the proposal is likely to generate less traffic than the previous use, and in principle they have no objection to the scheme. Previous permissions have been granted on the site on the basis that if there was to be a boundary treatment erected within the access, that this must not interfere with visibility displays. However, the existing neighbouring properties have erected their own fences onto the access, which has affected the visibility along the access. Part of the fence to number 14 and 16 Schofield Road had retrospective planning permission, so needs to be considered in terms of highway safety. Other parts of the fence does not have planning permission, which is required as it affects highway visibility. Subsequently, Highways requested that these boundaries at the access point onto Schofield Road, so just for here, was reduced. The council's enforcement team are currently dealing with these neighbouring properties. The fence at number 10 Schofield Road has now been removed, and an enforcement notice has been served on the occupant and the owner of number 14 Schofield Road to remove the unauthorised part of the fencing. County Highways have a number of objections to the current scheme. The first objection is their concerns that the bins would not be moved back onto the site from their collection points within the access. The collection points are just there, just close to Schofield Road. This could reduce the usable area of the access. However, this could happen at any property and is not a planning issue or a reason that would be easy to defend at appeal. Within the site, there is an actual bin storage area there, which the properties will have to pull their bins back after collections. Highway's second objection is that the large vehicle using the access road belonging to number 14 could have difficulty accessing the road, especially if the bins remained in the access road. However, the road is existing and is not changing, and in any case, access across a private area would be a private matter between the owner of the access and this neighbouring property. The proposed development has 9 parking spaces in total, divided as 2 spaces each for the houses and 1 space for the flat. Highway's third objection is that the level of parking is inadequate and could cause parking on Schofield Road. There is no national or local guidance in relation to minimum parking standards, and it's considered that 2 spaces per 2-bedroom property and 1 space for the 1-bedroom flat is reasonable, and again, refusal on this basis would be difficult to defend at appeal. In relation to 106 requests, the proposal is less than 10 units. Therefore, government legislation states that no monetary contributions can be requested. In conclusion, it is considered that subject to the conditions as set out in the agenda and your addendum, that the planning balance weighs heavily in support of the application and that it is both consistent with local as well as national policy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just before I bring Mr Harris in to speak, can I just explain, because there are new members, although it was probably explained last time, about the protocol for speaking. We tend to have a list of speakers. Under the Constitution, they're allowed 3 minutes. I try to be strict on that, that's so it's fair to everybody. But however, following on from that, members might want to ask points of clarification. That's all they can be, is to clarify something that's been said by the speaker. Following on from that, officers may or may not want to add any comments in, and then it will be down to members. Somebody will have to move something so that the debate can take place and hopefully a decision taken. Okay, thank you. Mr Harris.
Thank you. Do I need to?
Yeah, just press the big button, yeah.
This one?
That's it.
Give me up from here? Or
Yep.
do I need? Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. As per the introduction, my name is Paul Harris. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and I speak this evening on behalf of the applicant, Mr McIlrath, in support of the application. I also appreciate we're the only item on the agenda this evening, so I will do my best to be brief. And firstly, I'd like to thank your officers for their constructive feedback to date, and obviously I fully endorse the positive recommendation they've reached. As is noted in your committee papers, the starting point for this application is the fact that planning permission has previously been granted on this site for 5 dwellings, and that's permissions 032228 and 031610 combined. Clearly, this represents a very important material consideration in the decision-making process. Broadly speaking, the application before you today differs little from those previously approved, but only insofar as the semi-detached properties are a little deeper and there is a greater quantum of designated parking spaces. It is disappointing, therefore, to see an objection from the Highways Authority, although I note that despite being consulted on the 17th of April on the latest revision and reminded again for the need to provide comments to assist your officers on the 30th of April, we are yet to receive any comments from them. It seems reasonable to me to conclude that this lack of further response means that they are now entirely content with the revisions. In any event, as your officers have said tonight, they are wholly satisfied that there are no highway-related issues which amount to anything which could substantiate a reason for refusal. And let's not forget that the last lawful use of this site was as a garage court, and as your report notes, the comings and goings associated with 5 modest dwellings would be far less intensive than this garage court use. And to reiterate my previous point, planning permission has already been granted for 5 dwellings on this site in the recent past. I also note that your officers are entirely content that the layout is one which will ensure the council's residential amenity standards are not compromised, and that the overall design and layout will create a cohesive group of properties that would restore a currently vacant piece of overgrown and unkempt brownfield land. In summary, the proposal represents an opportunity to provide 5 much-needed homes within the borough on a brownfield site in a sustainable location, which will secure an immediate enhancement to the visual amenities of the local area, whilst respecting the amenities that nearby residents can reasonably expect to enjoy, without any material compromise to the safe functioning of the public highway. It therefore fully accords with the development plan, and I ask you to support your officer's recommendation and grant planning permission subject to the conditions set out. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Are there any... No? Anything come back on, Jackie? No? In that case, can I move the recommendation which is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions printed? Is that seconded? Any member? Councillor Grant.
I'm a little bit confused really, because we've got an objection from County Highways, yet reading the report on impact of highway safety, there seems to be mention of these objections, but the officers are saying therefore parking levels deemed acceptable, things like this. Is this our officers overruling the county officers with their professional opinions, or is it the county officers revising their original opinions? Because there seems to be no reference to any revision of opinion, or I just want a bit of clarification on that.
The comments that we put forward for you today are your officers' comments. Highways haven't come back in terms of the revised layout plans. I have, because he hadn't come back, I have actually spoken to him by the phone, and we've gone through point by point of his objections, so I could make sure that I fully understood where he was coming from and that there was no misinterpretation of his comments.
Now, just for borough council officers, it's just I'm on both the borough and county council, so that can get a bit confusing. So that's the case. There's a few of these concerns raised by residents. One being flooding. Have we had historic flooding issues or any works that can be done here to mitigate that?
Yeah, please, Jackie. Yeah.
Only a minor application. We haven't received a response, or we haven't had to consult with the Environment Agency or with the Flood Risk Management team. The Flood Risk Management team would likely have seen it on the weekly list, but they wouldn't actually comment on a scheme as small as this.
Okay, because of course before we vote to approve or reject this, it's important. And this road might need to be built up due to underground services. Has any of this been looked into and studied? Are there any plans to do any work along these lines as it deemed necessary?
The site, and because it's not in the flood risk area, there's no flood risk assessment being deemed necessary for the actual application. They will have to adhere to building control in terms of the treatment for foul and obviously surface water.
And is to do with the sewer connections here?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, sorry. Some concerns about this. Again, in relation to the objections that have been received. One of them is the point that has been made about whether or not the entrance road is actually going to be suitable for emergency vehicles, and I'm thinking more of a fire appliance more perhaps than an ambulance, because there would need to be. Now, the point I make about that, it's okay saying that the bins will be there for collection and taken back. What happens if people don't take them back and you need the emergency services vehicles to get up that access road? It does. It might be a moot point, but the point is there. If those bins are not taken back after collection, then it will narrow the road considerably. The other point is the turning point. I do find it strange that you have a road that's leading into an area with garages, and I'm assuming the turning point is there so that possibly because there may not be room for vehicles to turn at the front of the properties, and I do find that quite strange. I accept the point that's been made about there were garages there before and people used to get in and out, but it does seem strange to me that you have an access road where people can pull up to the houses but then have to reverse into another side road to come back out again. I do have some concerns about that, Chair.
Anything at the moment, Jackie?
Chair.
Sorry?
Can I come back to those points?
Yeah.
In terms of the collection bins, similarly to any other house within the borough or anywhere, we can't make them take the bins back. However, any emergency supplies would soon move bins. In fact, they move cars if they need to get into any place. So I would hope that wouldn't be a problem. They would need to get round Schofield Road first of all, and if it was bin collection day, probably the same thing there. In terms of the actual emergency vehicles getting into the site, that would be part of what highways have considered as part of the application, and they haven't come specifically back on concerns in relation to that, because we would have certainly have looked at that as part of the assessment. In relation to the turning point you refer to, the actual turning point on the screen is the turning point purely for number 14 Schofield Road. Number 14 Schofield Road has a large commercial vehicle that he parks in his rear yard. That turning area is shown so that so you can actually see how he can manoeuvre within the site. In fact, the site is possibly, if approved, made better for him because there are gates at the moment, which means he can't go as far back into the site as he can there. In relation to the turning area within the site for the new residents, the turning area isn't shown, but it is sufficient within the site, and highways are happy with the turning area and the parking spaces and the layout that has been provided. Thank you, Chair.
Pomfret.
I'm sorry.
So, thank you.
One would think are basically five.
Sorry, Councillor Tanner, can you turn your mic off and...
Okay, I'm not against this development in principle because it does offer 5 modestly priced, one would hope, residences desperately needed. But looking at the plans, it looks quite a confined area. You've got there 9 vehicles potentially, And to turn one round when those spaces are all used, I mean those for in front of the flat, would seem to stick out into the sort of general use area. I'm not quite sure how anybody, might turn easily their vehicle in that area. And then you've got the bin store along one edge as well. Yes. The bin collection area, I mean, this is nothing in terms of safety, but people coming along Schofield Road that is full in their view, I mean, aesthetically it's not going to look too good either. I'm just wondering whether some alternative arrangement can't be made for the bins. My main point though is, how are vehicles going to turn round? You've got potentially 9 cars there and a very small area in which they can turn. Thank you.
At the moment,
Yes, please, yeah. Okay, can I just, yeah. In terms of the turning area, I can only reiterate that what I've just said. Highways looked at the site, again, whilst I was on the phone with him, going over the points of clarification. He was happy that there was adequate turning within the site. One of the conditions that was added subsequent to that conversation was in relation to no fencing by the actual parking areas, to keep those free, so that there was no restrictions, that people didn't put plants or fencing along those parts. So in terms of highways, they were happy with that. The bin store has been put there, and again, highways are happy with the actual location for the turning area within the site. You were mentioned about an alternative bin store. I wasn't quite sure whether you're referring to the actual bin store or the collection area. The collection area can't move from where it is because the bin refuse collection officers are restricted on the amount that they can actually go down a private road to collect the bins. So the actual those 2 positions for the collection and the bin store was considered the most optimal position for both highways and for our refuse teams. We've had long conversations about the bins on this and the previously withdrawn application. Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Seems familiar. I think in its previous iteration it's been before the committee before, and it's that picture in the bottom right which has jogged my memory on it because I thought it looked familiar. If I remember rightly before, the committee wasn't overly enamoured with the application as it was, but we said that we felt if we were to refuse it, we wouldn't win at appeal. And so I, along with others, begrudgingly voted to go with it. And I think this is the application where I proposed an amendment to remove the permitted development rights on the properties. Looking at condition 8, I see that you've already put in about removing the permitted development rights on the car garages, which are to be retained, so they cannot be converted or do anything like that. But looking at the plans, I think my concerns from last time still stand, particularly in that confined space about any permitted development. So I would like to move an amendment, Chair, and I hope it will get seconded, to remove the permitted development rights of the planning consent, because I think if any of those properties do decide to try and do something, it could add to the sense of containment for the new residents and probably cause problems for the existing residents too. I'm not overly happy with it, but I don't think there's any reason for refusal. But I think that's something that we can do to control some of the impacts this might have moving forward. But I would like to see the applicant actually move this forward, because looking at the history, there's been a number of applications, it's been before us before, and I don't want really to have to consider it a third time in another 5 years' time to move forward. So if we're going to grant these permissions, I would hope that the applicant will move them forward, but I would move the amendment that we remove the permitted development rights on the properties if we do approve this application, Chair.
And I'm happy decisions taken, unless the officers are going to tell me there's some reason why we can't do that. Regardless of the decision, it would be useful to have that in if it went to an inspector, because otherwise you might not get it at all. That's a reasonable thing. Okay. Are members, I'm going to bring you in now. Are members happy to go along with that proposal and second about removing the permitted development rights? Anybody not? Okay. Right, that's included within the thing now. Councillor Sargent.
And I had was number 7, where it said that if cars were going in and out, that actually a pedestrian couldn't walk past either. Normally small houses like this would have children in buggies, and the concern is that if somebody was walking out with a buggy, the car actually couldn't pass them on the road.
Highways haven't objected in those terms. In fact, the amendments to some of the previous schemes on this, that it's a shared access that you do get on a lot of sites now, rather than putting a narrow footpath and then which would mean the road narrowing. So it's a shared space that should be identified as such for those residents. And because of the access coming in on that corner, I think speeds are likely to be fairly low, either entering or exiting the site.
Okay, thank you. I do think it is a fairly balanced application, this one, but I think the balance for me swings in the favour of granting the planning permission because of a number of reasons. I think in regards to the bins, they do seem in an odd place perhaps, but residents would be dragging them down to that point anyway on the evening before the day of being collected, and there was a kind of an issue. I was a bit surprised at the issue over the amount of parking spaces. At 2, because our maximum used to be 1.5 in our old standards. So I was quite surprised at that. And of course, it's a brownfield site where we are trying wherever we can to save any greenbelt bits, and whatever you can get to balance that out as a help. In regards to emergency vehicles, they've often told us in the past if they need to get somewhere, they'll get there, whether they have to bulldoze anything out the way or whatever, they will do. Just a question before we move to the vote. I'm assuming the issue over the fences, although there's one been removed, the other one hasn't. If that didn't happen, I'm assuming that would prevent this application going ahead because you haven't got that visibility display.
The actual fence that we're referring to is illegal. It hasn't got planning permission, and an enforcement notice has been served. So we would have to go through the courts on that for its removal. Right.
So it's going to come down at some point. Well, if you win your argument, okay then. Right. Thank you. The recommendation is the one in front of you, but including an extra thing to remove the permitted development rights. So the recommendation is grant planning permission. All those in favour of that? And against? And abstentions? Okay, that's approved. Thank you. Please don't feel you have to rush off. I've kind of allocated, we're looking about half an hour, you think? For a little bit of training on 106s.